I'm Emma Rodriguez, 24, and I just signed the biggest software contract of my career here in Seattle, Washington. Last month, I watched my parents Michael and Sandra break down in tears when they discovered what their golden child, Isabella, had really become. 12 years ago, when I was just 12 years old, they made a choice that would split our family forever. They decided one daughter was worth keeping and the other was a burden to be shipped away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma's just going through a phase, my mother had whispered to my father that night, not knowing I was listening from the top of the stairs. Rosa can handle her better than we can. Isabella needs our attention right now. But what they called a phase was actually me grieving the loss of my little brother in a car accident, desperately needing my parents' love and support. Instead, they saw me as damaged goods interfering with their perfect life with my sister. Growing up in San Antonio, Texas, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. Dad owned Rodriguez Auto Group, three successful dealerships that made us one of the more prosperous Mexican-American families in Alamo Heights. Mom didn't work, instead dedicating herself to what she called family management, which really meant organizing Isabella's increasingly packed schedule of activities, playdates, and social events. Our house was a sprawling Mediterranean-style home with a pool, perfectly manicured lawn, and enough bedrooms for everyone to have their own space. The garage held Dad's collection of luxury cars that he rotated through depending on his mood, and Mom's white BMW X7 that she claimed was necessary for all of Isabella's transportation needs. For the first 12 years of my life, I thought I was part of this perfect picture. I had my own room decorated in soft pastels, attended the same private Catholic school as Isabella, and wore the same designer clothes that Mom carefully selected during her weekly shopping trips to the Pearl District. My parents seemed proud of both their daughters, showing us off at church functions and Dad's business events like matching accessories to their successful lifestyle. But everything changed the day our little brother Diego died. He was only 8 years old when the accident happened, struck by a drunk driver while riding his bike in our neighborhood. The funeral was a blur of black clothing, whispered prayers, and relatives I barely recognized offering their condolences. What I remember most clearly was how differently my parents processed their grief, and how that difference would ultimately determine which daughter they chose to keep. Isabella, who had always been the more social and outgoing of us sisters, seemed to bounce back from Diego's death with remarkable resilience. Within weeks, she was back to her normal routine of ballet classes, piano lessons, and weekend sleepovers with friends. She rarely mentioned Diego, and when she did, it was with a matter-of-fact tone that impressed the adults around her. Isabella is so strong, church friends would tell my mother. She's handling this tragedy with such grace. I, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about Diego. I missed our late-night video game sessions, the way he would sneak into my room during thunderstorms, and how he always saved me the last piece of his Halloween candy. I started having nightmares, lost my appetite, and found it impossible to concentrate on schoolwork. My grades began slipping, and I lost interest in the violin lessons I had previously enjoyed. Where Isabella's resilience made my parents proud, my grief made them uncomfortable. They wanted to move forward, to heal as a family, but my constant sadness served as a daily reminder of what they had lost. Family dinners became tense affairs where Isabella would chatter about her day while I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate. Mom would shoot me warning looks across the table, silently urging me to participate in the conversation and stop bringing down the mood. Emma needs to snap out of this. I heard Dad tell Mom one evening after a particularly difficult day where I had cried during math class and had to be sent to the school counselor. It's been 3 months. Isabella has moved on, we all need to move on. Mom agreed, but her solution wasn't therapy or family counseling. Instead, she began researching what she called alternative healing approaches for troubled children. She bought books about adolescent psychology, consulted with our family priest about spiritual healing, and even looked into expensive retreat programs for grieving teenagers. But every solution she explored had one thing in common: they all involved removing me from the daily family routine that Isabella was thriving in. The idea to send me to my grandmother Rosa came during one of Mom's phone calls with her own mother. Abuela Rosa lived in Fredericksburg, a small town about 45 minutes outside of San Antonio, in the modest ranch house where Mom had grown up. Rosa was a retired elementary school teacher who had raised 5 children of her own, including my mother, and was known throughout our extended family as someone who could handle any crisis with calm wisdom and endless patience. "Maybe Emma needs a change of scenery," Mom suggested to Dad after that phone call. "Rosa has experience with children who are struggling. She knows how to provide structure and stability, and it would give Isabella space to heal without constantly being reminded of what happened." What my parents framed as a temporary healing opportunity for me was actually a permanent solution to what they saw as a problem. They weren't sending me to Abuela Rosa to help me grieve and then return home stronger. They were sending me away so that they could focus all their attention, resources, and love on the daughter who hadn't been broken by tragedy. The decision was made without consulting me. One Thursday evening in late September, Mom sat me down in my room and explained that I would be spending some time with Abuela Rosa to help me work through my feelings about Diego. She presented it as an adventure, a chance to learn about my Mexican heritage, and spend quality time with the grandmother I only saw on major holidays. "Rosa is so excited to have you," Mom said, stroking my hair with a gentleness that I hadn't felt from her in months. "She's already planning all the things you two will do together. You'll love Fredericksburg. It's peaceful there, away from all the noise and distractions of the city." I didn't want to go. Despite my sadness, San Antonio was still my home. My friends were at school here, my room contained all my belongings and memories of Diego, and deep down, I still hoped that my parents would find a way to help me heal while keeping our family together. But at 12 years old, I didn't have a choice in the matter. The following Saturday, Dad loaded my clothes and personal belongings into his truck while Mom helped Isabella plan her upcoming birthday party. There was no family discussion, no tearful goodbye, no promise of when I would return. It was handled like a routine errand, as casual as dropping off dry cleaning or picking up groceries. As we drove through the Texas Hill Country toward Fredericksburg, Dad tried to make conversation about school and my upcoming classes, but I could tell his heart wasn't really in it. He was already mentally back home, planning weekend activities with Isabella and Mom that wouldn't include me. When we pulled into Abuela Rosa's gravel driveway, he helped me carry my suitcases to the front porch, but didn't linger for a long goodbye. "Be good for your grandmother," he said, giving me a quick hug that felt more like a polite gesture than a father's embrace. "We'll call you next week." Abuela Rosa welcomed me with the kind of warmth that had been missing from my parents'
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
House since Diego's death. She enveloped me in a hug that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, held me tight while I cried, and whispered Spanish words of comfort that somehow made more sense than anything my parents had said in months. Her small ranch house, with its worn wooden floors and walls covered in family photos spanning generations, felt more like home in those first 5 minutes than my parents' perfect house had felt in weeks. "Mija," she said, using the Spanish term of endearment that my parents rarely used at home, "you're safe here. We're going to take care of that broken heart of yours." That first night, as I lay in the guest bedroom that would become my permanent room, I could hear Abuela Rosa on the phone with my mother. Their conversation was in rapid Spanish, too fast for me to follow completely, but I caught enough words to understand that this wasn't the temporary arrangement my parents had described to me. "Sí, Abuela was saying, she can stay as long as she needs to. The school here is good, she'll be fine. As long as she needs to. Not a few weeks, not until I felt better, but as long as necessary." That's when I realized that my parents hadn't sent me to heal and return home. They had sent me away to start a new life without them, leaving them free to rebuild their perfect family with the daughter who hadn't disappointed them with her grief. That night, I cried myself to sleep, not just for Diego, but for the parents I had lost too. But I had no idea that the woman sleeping in the next room would teach me everything about strength, resilience, and self-worth that my parents never could. Abuela Rosa was about to show me that being abandoned by the people who should love you most doesn't define your worth, it reveals theirs. The next morning would begin the most transformative period of my life, though I wouldn't understand that for years to come. All I knew was that my family had chosen my sister over me, and I was starting over in a small town with a grandmother who was essentially a stranger. But sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect, and sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what we're truly capable of becoming. Identity and stakes. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and at 24 years old, I'm living proof that the people who abandon you don't get to define your future. I'm calling you from my corner office on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, where I work as a senior UX designer for Cloud Tech Solutions, one of the fastest-growing software companies in the Pacific Northwest. My salary is more than my father made in his best years running his auto dealerships, and the signing bonus from my latest contract promotion could buy 3 of the cars he was so proud of collecting. But 12 years ago, I was just a broken 12-year-old girl whose parents decided I was too damaged to keep. While they invested everything they had in my younger sister Isabella's future, I was learning to rebuild myself from scratch in a small Texas town with a grandmother who barely knew me. The contrast between what my life is now and what my parents expected it to become is so stark that when they saw me again last month, they couldn't hide their shock. Seattle feels like another planet compared to Fredericksburg, Texas, where I spent my teenage years. The city moves with an energy that matches my ambitions, filled with coffee shops that never close, and people who measure success by innovation rather than appearances. My apartment in Capitol Hill overlooks Elliott Bay, and on clear days, I can see Mount Rainier rising like a promise in the distance. Every morning when I wake up to this view, I'm reminded of how far I've traveled, not just in miles, but in becoming someone my 12-year-old self could never have imagined. The tech industry in Seattle rewards the kind of thinking that my parents never understood. Here, being different isn't a problem to be solved, it's an asset to be leveraged. My bilingual abilities, my experience navigating between different worlds, and my understanding of what it means to start over with nothing have all become advantages in a field that values diverse perspectives and creative problem solving. The empathy I developed during those difficult years after Diego's death has made me exceptionally good at understanding user needs and designing interfaces that feel intuitive and welcoming. My current project involves redesigning the onboarding experience for a healthcare app that serves primarily Spanish-speaking communities. The irony isn't lost on me that the language my parents discouraged me from speaking at home, claiming it would hold me back in professional settings, has become one of my most valuable professional skills. Abuela Rosa always insisted we speak Spanish during our evening conversations, and now those hours of practice are directly contributing to my success in ways my parents never could have predicted. The stakes of my story go beyond personal vindication, though that element certainly exists. Every day I work with young developers and designers who come from backgrounds similar to mine, kids who were underestimated by their families or told they weren't smart enough for technical careers. When I mentor them through difficult projects or help them navigate workplace politics, I'm passing on the lessons that Abuela Rosa taught me, that resilience, patience, and the quiet power of proving people wrong through consistent excellence rather than dramatic confrontation. My success isn't just about overcoming my parents' abandonment, it's about redefining what family success looks like. While they poured all their resources into creating the perfect life for Isabella, I've built something entirely different. My chosen family includes colleagues who've become close friends, mentors who believed in me when I was still learning to believe in myself, and a romantic partner who loves the parts of me that my parents found problematic. The foundation life in Fredericksburg, with Abuela Rosa began with culture shock that went deeper than just adjusting to small-town pace after city living. Rosa's house sat on 2 acres of land that she had turned into a practical paradise, with vegetable gardens, fruit trees, and chicken coops that provided most of our food. The morning after my arrival, she woke me before sunrise, not with an alarm clock, but with the gentle touch of her hand on my shoulder and the smell of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. En esta casa, we start each day by greeting the sun, she told me in her mixture of Spanish and English that would become the soundtrack of my teenage years. The earth doesn't wait for us to be ready, so we learn to be ready for the earth. This wasn't the metaphorical wisdom of greeting cards or inspirational posters. Rosa meant it literally. By 6 in the morning, we were outside collecting eggs from the chickens, watering the tomato plants, and checking the peach trees for ripe fruit. The work was harder than anything I had ever done in my parents' house, where the closest I came to physical labor was loading the dishwasher or carrying my laundry upstairs. But there was something deeply satisfying about this routine that I hadn't expected. Each task had a clear purpose and visible result. When we gathered eggs, we knew exactly what we would have for breakfast. When we watered the garden, we could see the plants growing stronger day by day. When we picked peaches, we would spend the afternoon making preserves that would feed us through the winter. Everything connected to everything else in a way that made sense, unlike the abstract busyness that had dominated my parents' household. Rosa's approach to raising me was fundamentally different from my parents' style, where they had focused on external appearances and achievements. She emphasized internal development and practical skills. Instead of enrolling me in expensive activities designed to impress other parents, she taught me to cook traditional Mexican dishes, to sew and mend clothing, to manage household budgets, and to speak Spanish with the fluency that my parents had never prioritized. Your parents want you to fit in with their world, Rosa explained one evening as we sat on the porch shelling peas. But their world doesn't have room for who you really are. Here we build a world that fits you. The local school in Fredericksburg was smaller than the private academy I had attended in San Antonio, but the teachers knew every student personally and had the time to notice when someone was struggling or excelling. My homeroom teacher, Mrs. Patterson, took special interest in my writing abilities and encouraged me to join the school newspaper. For the first time since Diego's death, I found myself looking forward to something. Writing became my outlet for processing not just my grief over losing my brother, but my confusion about being separated from my family. The school newspaper gave me a legitimate reason to ask difficult questions and seek honest answers. I interviewed other students about their family situations and discovered that several of them also lived with grandparents, aunts, or family friends for various reasons. This helped me understand that my situation, while painful, wasn't entirely unique. Rosa encouraged my interest in journalism by driving me to interviews around town and helping me research local history for feature articles. She never made me feel like my questions were too complicated or my curiosity was inappropriate. When I wanted to write about migrant workers in the area, she introduced me to families she knew and helped translate when my Spanish wasn't adequate for complex conversations. Through these interviews, I began to understand the broader context of my own experience. Many of the families I met had made difficult decisions about where children should live, based on practical considerations rather than emotional preferences. Some kids lived with relatives during the school year because the schools were better in certain areas. Others stayed with grandparents while parents worked multiple jobs or dealt with health problems. What made my situation different wasn't the living arrangement itself, but the lack of honesty about why it was happening. Rosa never criticized my parents directly, but she also never pretended that their decision to send me away was temporary or primarily motivated by concern for my well-being. When I asked her directly why my parents had really sent me to live with her, she gave me the kind of straight answer that adults rarely offer children. Your parents love you, Mija, but they don't know how to love someone who reminds them of their pain, she said. Isabella looks forward, like they do. You look backward and inward, like I do. They need her to be their future. I need you to be yours. This explanation made more sense than anything my parents had told me about needing time to heal or benefiting from a change of scenery. Rosa acknowledged that my parents had made a choice based on their own needs rather than mine, but she framed it as an opportunity rather than a rejection. She was giving me permission to be myself in ways that my parents never had. The foundation that Rosa built for me was constructed from honesty, practical skills, and cultural pride, rather than material advantages or social status. She taught me to value competence over appearance, substance over style, and internal satisfaction over external validation. These weren't abstract lessons delivered through lectures, but practical wisdom embedded in daily routines and accumulated through countless small experiences. Every evening, Rosa and I would sit together at her kitchen table, working on homework, household planning, or craft projects, while we talked about our days. She would ask me about my classes, my friendships, and my thoughts about everything from local politics to family relationships. These conversations treated me as a thinking person whose opinions mattered, rather than a child who needed to be managed or fixed. During my first year in Fredericksburg, Rosa also began teaching me about our family history in ways that my parents had never done. She showed me photographs of great-grandparents I had never heard of, told me stories about relatives who had worked as teachers, farmers, and small business owners, and explained how our family had navigated between Mexican and American cultures for generations. Your parents think success means forgetting where you came from, Rosa said one afternoon as we looked through old photo albums. But real success means remembering where you came from and choosing what to keep. This perspective on success would prove to be radically different from what my parents were teaching Isabella during the same period. While they focused on helping her assimilate into upper-class American culture, Rosa was helping me understand that I could be successful while maintaining my cultural identity and values. The foundation Rosa built for me was stronger than anything my parents could have provided because it was based on acceptance rather than transformation. She wasn't trying to fix what was wrong with me or turn me into someone else. She was giving me the tools to become a more complete version of who I already was. The promise in my story wasn't a spoken commitment or written contract, but something much more subtle and ultimately more powerful. It was the implicit understanding that families stick together through difficult times, that parents protect and support all their children equally, and that blood relationships create bonds that transcend temporary challenges. This promise had been woven into every family photograph, every holiday celebration, and every public appearance where my parents presented Michael and Sandra Rodriguez as devoted parents to their 3 beautiful children. For the first 12 years of my life, I had never questioned this promise. When relatives asked about my future plans, my parents would beam with pride and talk about how all their children were destined for great things. When teachers complimented my academic performance, Mom would share the credit with Dad, talking about how they were raising their kids to be leaders and achievers. When church friends commented on how well-behaved we all were, my parents would describe their parenting philosophy of high expectations combined with unwavering support. The promise was reinforced through countless small gestures and family rituals. Every school event had both parents in attendance, camera ready to capture achievements and applaud efforts. Every birthday was celebrated with elaborate parties that demonstrated how much each child was valued. Every Christmas morning featured carefully selected gifts that showed how well our parents understood our individual interests and personalities. Even after Diego's death, the promise initially seemed to remain intact. During the first few weeks of grieving, my parents included me in their plans for healing as a family. They talked about grief counseling that we would all attend together, about taking a family vacation to help us process our loss, and about ways we could honor Diego's memory as a united family unit. We're all going to get through this together, Mom had said during one of our early family meetings about coping with Diego's death. The Rodriguez family takes care of each other, no matter what happens. Dad had nodded emphatically, adding, "We're stronger together than we are apart." That's what families do. They support each other during the hard times. These weren't empty platitudes spoken for the benefit of outsiders. In those early weeks, I genuinely believed my parents meant what they were saying. They seemed to understand that Diego's death had affected all of us differently, and they appeared committed to helping each family member heal in their own way while maintaining our connections to each other. The promise also extended to more practical matters. My parents had always talked about their commitment to providing equal opportunities for all their children's education, extracurricular activities, and future planning. They frequently mentioned college funds that were being maintained for each of us, and they made sure that any advantages given to one child were balanced with comparable advantages for the others. When Isabella started taking ballet lessons, I was enrolled in violin classes. When I joined the school newspaper, Isabella was signed up for debate team. When one of us needed new clothes for a special event, the other would get a shopping trip soon afterward. This careful attention to fairness wasn't just about preventing sibling rivalry, it was about demonstrating their commitment to supporting each child's individual development while maintaining family unity. The promise had deeper cultural dimensions as well. Rosa had raised my mother with strong beliefs about family loyalty and the importance of maintaining connections across generations. During our regular visits to Fredericksburg, Abuela would often comment approvingly about how my parents were raising us to understand our responsibilities to each other and to the extended family. Family is everything, Rosa would say during these visits, speaking as much to my parents as to us children. When the world gets difficult, family is what protects you and gives you strength. My parents would nod in agreement, often sharing stories about how their own siblings had supported each other through various challenges, or how they had helped relatives navigate difficult situations. They presented themselves as people who understood and lived by these values, and who were passing them on to the next generation. The promise was also reinforced through their public personas in San Antonio's Mexican-American professional community. Dad's success in business was often attributed to his strong family values and his commitment to providing opportunities for his children to succeed while maintaining their cultural identity. Mom's reputation as a dedicated parent was built on her visible involvement in our activities and her frequently expressed pride in our achievements. During community events and family gatherings, other adults would often comment on how fortunate we children were to have parents who were so committed to our well-being and success. These comments weren't just polite social conversation, they reflected genuine admiration for what appeared to be a family that had successfully balanced professional achievement with strong family bonds. The promise seemed especially secure because it had already been tested by smaller challenges and had held firm. When I struggled with math in elementary school, my parents invested in tutoring and worked with me at home until I improved. When Isabella went through a difficult social situation with friends, they provided emotional support and helped her navigate the complex dynamics. When Diego had trouble adjusting to a new school, they advocated for him with teachers and administrators until he felt comfortable. These experiences had taught me that the Rodriguez family solved problems together, and that no individual family member would be abandoned if they encountered difficulties. The promise wasn't just about good times and celebrations, it was about weathering storms and emerging stronger as a unit. Even our extended family relationships seemed to reinforce this promise. During visits with cousins, aunts and uncles, I could see examples of families that had maintained strong bonds despite geographic separation, economic challenges, and personal differences. Our family culture celebrated stories of relatives who had sacrificed for each other, supported each other through crises, and shared resources.
During difficult times, the promise had seemed so fundamental to our family identity that I never imagined it could be conditional or selective. I understood that parents might need to make difficult decisions about practical matters like finances or living arrangements, but I believed that these decisions would always be made in the best interests of all the children and with their input and understanding.
When my parents began talking about sending me to live with Rosa, they initially framed it in ways that seemed consistent with the promise. They described it as a temporary arrangement designed to help me heal, with the clear implication that I would return home when I was ready. They talked about how Rosa's expertise with children and her peaceful environment would provide exactly what I needed to work through my grief. But even as they presented this plan as being in my best interests, subtle changes in their behavior suggested that the promise was already being modified in ways I didn't fully understand. Their attention and emotional energy were increasingly focused on Isabella's needs and activities, while conversations about my future became shorter and less detailed. The promise that had once seemed unbreakable was already developing cracks, though I wouldn't recognize them until much later. What I interpreted as temporary adjustments to help our family heal were actually the beginning of a fundamental restructuring of family priorities that would leave me on the outside looking in. The calm period the first few months in Fredericksburg passed with a deceptive sense of normalcy that masked the permanent nature of my new living situation. Phone calls from my parents came regularly, filled with updates about Isabella's activities and questions about my adjustment to small-town life. These conversations felt routine and reassuring, like the kind of check-ins that any family might have when a child was spending an extended time with relatives. Mom would ask about my classes at the new school, whether I was making friends, and how I was getting along with Abuela Rosa. Her tone was warm and interested, the same voice she had always used when asking about my day after school. Dad would usually get on the phone briefly to ask about my grades and to tell me he was proud of how well I was handling the transition. "We knew you were strong enough to do this," he would say, his voice carrying the same approval I remembered from when he praised my academic achievements or extracurricular successes. "Rosa says you're doing great with everything." These phone calls created an atmosphere of continuity that helped me believe my parents' original explanation that this was a temporary healing opportunity rather than a permanent relocation. They talked about me returning home for holidays, about visiting Fredericksburg to see how well I was doing, and about decisions we would make together about my future once I had worked through my grief about Diego. Isabella would occasionally get on the phone to share news about her friends, her classes, and her various activities. Her chatter was familiar and comfortable, full of the kind of everyday details that siblings naturally share with each other. She would ask about my new school, tell me about movies she had seen, and complain about teachers or assignments in ways that made me feel connected to her normal teenage experience. During these early conversations, Isabella never seemed to view my absence as permanent or unusual. She would make casual references to things we would do together when I came home, activities we could plan for summer vacation, or changes to my room that she thought I might like. Her attitude suggested that our parents had presented my time with Rosa to her as a temporary arrangement just as they had to me. The calls from home weren't the only thing that made this period feel calm and temporary. Rosa herself seemed to be treating my presence as a gradual transition rather than a permanent placement. She enrolled me in school and helped me establish routines, but she also frequently mentioned my parents and maintained connections between my current life and my previous one. When I struggled with homesickness or expressed frustration about being away from my family, Rosa would acknowledge these feelings without dismissing them or suggesting that I needed to accept permanent separation. She would say things like, "It's natural to miss home, Mia. Family love doesn't disappear just because you're living somewhere else for a while." Her responses reinforced the idea that this living arrangement had an end date even if that date wasn't clearly defined. She seemed to be preparing me to eventually return to my parents rather than helping me build a completely independent life in Fredericksburg. School in Fredericksburg also contributed to the sense that this was a temporary situation. Teachers and classmates accepted me as a new student without asking too many questions about why I had transferred mid-year or how long I expected to stay. The guidance counselor helped me choose classes that would transfer back to my San Antonio school easily, and my academic records were maintained in ways that suggested an eventual return to my previous educational track. My new friendships developed slowly and carefully, partly because I wasn't sure how long I would be staying, and partly because I was still processing my grief about Diego and my confusion about my family situation. The friends I made understood that I was living with my grandmother temporarily, and they didn't push for details about why or for how long. Even my extracurricular activities reflected the assumption that this was a temporary arrangement. When I joined the school newspaper, the advisor suggested that I focus on skills that would serve me well wherever I ended up attending high school. When I showed interest in learning more advanced Spanish, the teacher framed it as something that would impress my parents and benefit me when I returned to San Antonio's competitive academic environment. During this calm period, my parents' lives seemed to be stabilizing as well, which reinforced the sense that we were all moving through a healing process that would eventually reunite our family. Mom's phone updates included news about getting back to their normal routines, Dad returning to his usual level of involvement with the auto dealerships, and Isabella thriving in her various activities. They talked about redecorating Diego's room, not by erasing all traces of him, but by creating a memorial space that would allow them to honor his memory while moving forward. They mentioned family therapy sessions that were helping them process their grief in healthy ways. They described plans for future family vacations and holidays that included me as a matter of course. These updates created the impression that my parents were successfully working through their own grief while giving me the space I needed to work through mine. The temporary separation seemed to be serving its intended purpose of allowing everyone to heal at their own pace without the added stress of trying to coordinate different grieving styles within the same household. Rosa's reports to my parents also contributed to this sense of positive progress and eventual reunion. During her phone conversations with my mother, which I could sometimes overhear, she would share updates about my improving grades, my growing comfort with small-town life, and my gradual return to emotional stability after Diego's death. "She's doing so much better," Rosa would tell my mother. "The nightmares have stopped, her appetite is back to normal, and she's making friends at school. The fresh air and slower pace are exactly what she needed." These reports seemed to satisfy my parents that their decision to send me to Fredericksburg had been wise and beneficial. Mom would relay Rosa's positive updates to me during our phone calls, praising me for my resilience and expressing pride in how well I was handling the challenge of living away from home. The calm period felt like evidence that difficult family situations could be navigated successfully with patience, wisdom, and mutual consideration. Everyone seemed to be getting what they needed. I was healing in a peaceful environment. Isabella was receiving focused attention during her own adjustment to Diego's death, and my parents were managing their grief without the added stress of trying to help me process mine. But this surface calm was masking fundamental changes in family dynamics that none of us were fully acknowledging. While I was building a new life in Fredericksburg, my parents and Isabella were building a new family structure in San Antonio that didn't include a place for me. The temporary arrangement was becoming permanent through a series of small decisions and gradual adjustments that none of us were willing to name directly. The calm period would eventually end when the reality of these changes became impossible to ignore, but for several months it felt like proof that families could weather serious challenges and emerge stronger on the other side. The inciting incident, the moment everything changed, came during my sophomore year at Fredericksburg High School, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon that started like any other day. I had been living with Abuela Rosa for nearly 2 years, and the rhythm of our life together had become as natural as breathing. I walked home from school through the familiar streets of downtown Fredericksburg, past the German bakery where Rosa bought our weekend treats, and the hardware store where she knew every employee by name. The October air carried the scent of mesquite smoke from someone's barbecue and the earthy smell of fallen pecan leaves that crunched under my feet. I was thinking about the newspaper article I needed to finish for Friday's edition, a feature about local high school students who were starting their own businesses. The story had given me an excuse to interview classmates about their entrepreneurial dreams, and I had discovered that several of them had remarkably sophisticated plans for everything from custom jewelry making to lawn care services. When I pushed open the front door of Rosa's house, I expected to find her in the kitchen preparing our afternoon snack of fresh tortillas and whatever fruit was currently ripening in the garden. Instead, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with 2 coffee cups, one empty and one barely touched, staring at a manila envelope that lay unopened between them. "Mija," she said without looking up, her voice carrying a heaviness that I had rarely heard from her. "Sit down, we need to talk." The envelope bore the return address of my parents' attorney in San Antonio, and even before Rosa explained what was inside, something cold and sharp settled in my stomach. Over the past 2 years, our family's legal and financial communications had been handled through informal phone calls and personal visits. The presence of an official legal document suggested a level of formality that didn't match the temporary flexible arrangement I believed we still had. Rosa's hands were steady as she opened the envelope, but I could see tension in the set of her shoulders and the way she pressed her lips together while reading the contents. She read through several pages of documents silently, occasionally making soft sounds of understanding or disapproval. When she finally looked up at me, her expression was a mixture of sadness, anger, and something that looked like resignation. "Your parents want to make this arrangement permanent," she said simply. "They're asking me to become your legal guardian." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though part of me had suspected for months that my stay in Fredericksburg was lasting longer than anyone had originally planned. The formal language of legal guardianship stripped away all the comfortable ambiguity that had allowed me to believe I was simply spending an extended time with my grandmother while my family healed from Diego's death. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Rosa spread the documents across the table so I could see them, pointing to specific sections as she explained their contents. The legal papers laid out a comprehensive plan for transferring responsibility for my education, healthcare, and general welfare from my parents to her. There were provisions for child support payments, details about how major decisions would be made, and timelines for completing the legal process. "It means they don't want you to come home," Rosa said with the blunt honesty that I had learned to expect from her. "It means they've decided that Isabella needs their full attention and they think you're better off here with me." The documents included a letter from my parents addressed to Rosa, explaining their reasoning for seeking this permanent arrangement. As Rosa read portions of it aloud, I listened to my parents' words with growing disbelief and hurt. They described their decision as being in everyone's best interest, emphasizing how well I had adjusted to life in Fredericksburg and how much Isabella needed their focused support during her high school years. "Emma has thrived under your care in ways that we couldn't have provided," my mother had written. "She's found stability and purpose in Fredericksburg that we weren't able to give her after Diego's death. We think it would be disruptive and unfair to uproot her from an environment where she's so clearly flourishing." The letter went on to describe Isabella's increasing involvement in competitive activities that required significant parental time and financial investment. She had been accepted into an elite ballet program that involved travel to competitions and master classes. She was taking advanced placement courses that my parents wanted to support with private tutoring. She had been selected for leadership positions in several school organizations that came with demanding schedules and high expectations. "Isabella is at a crucial point in her development," my father had added in his portion of the letter. "The next few years will determine her opportunities for college and beyond. We need to be able to focus completely on supporting her during this critical time." What struck me most painfully about their reasoning was how they had reframed my absence as a benefit to me rather than a convenience for them. They weren't acknowledging that they had chosen to prioritize one daughter over the other. Instead, they were presenting Isabella's needs as more urgent and my contentment in Fredericksburg as proof that separation was what I truly wanted. The documents also revealed financial details that I hadn't understood before. Rather than continuing to support me as their dependent child, my parents were proposing to pay Rosa a monthly amount that would cover my basic expenses but was significantly less than what they had been spending on Isabella's activities and opportunities. They were essentially paying Rosa to raise me so that they could invest their full resources in Isabella's future. Rosa watched my face carefully as I processed this information, and when she saw tears beginning to form in my eyes, she reached across the table to take my hands in hers. Her touch was warm and calloused from years of garden work and household management, and her grip was firm enough to ground me in the moment, even as my understanding of my family's situation shifted fundamentally. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she said gently. "These papers don't mean anything unless I sign them, and I won't sign anything without talking to you first." But even as Rosa offered me some control over the situation, I understood that my real choice was between accepting the legal guardianship arrangement or fighting to return to a family that no longer wanted me as a full member. My parents had made their priorities clear, and those priorities didn't include maintaining space for me in their daily lives or their future plans. The inciting incident wasn't just the arrival of the legal documents, it was the moment when I had to confront the reality that my parents' love was conditional and selective. For nearly 2 years, I had maintained the hope that our separation was temporary and that my family would eventually reunite stronger than before. The legal papers forced me to acknowledge that my parents had been planning a permanent separation while allowing me to believe in an eventual homecoming. That evening, Rosa and I sat on the front porch as the sun set over the rolling hills of Fredericksburg, and she asked me what I wanted to do. The question was more complicated than it appeared because it forced me to choose between fighting for a place in a family that had already moved on without me or accepting a new life that I hadn't chosen but that had proven to be nurturing and supportive. "What do you think I should do?" I asked her, genuinely uncertain about which path would be better for my future. "I think you should do whatever gives you the best chance to become the person you're meant to be," Rosa replied. "Your parents love you, but they don't understand you. I can't give you everything they could give you, but I can give you something they can't." "What's that?" I asked. "I can give you a family that sees your worth instead of your problems," she said simply. The inciting incident crystallized a choice that would define the rest of my adolescence and young adulthood. I could fight to return to a family that saw me as a burden to be managed, or I could embrace a new family structure that celebrated my strengths and supported my individual development. The legal documents had forced a decision that none of us had been willing to make explicitly, and that decision would determine whether I spent my remaining childhood years trying to earn love that was conditional or building a foundation of self-worth that was unshakable. The shocking revelation, the full scope of my parents' betrayal, didn't become clear until Rosa and I drove to San Antonio the following weekend to discuss the guardianship papers in person. I had expected a difficult but honest conversation about family needs and practical considerations. What I discovered instead was that my parents had been systematically erasing me from their family narrative while constructing an entirely new identity for themselves as devoted parents of one exceptional daughter. The first shock came when we pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, and I saw that my father had installed a new mailbox with elegant script reading "The Rodriguez Family." Below the family name, in smaller letters, it listed Michael, Sandra, and Isabella. My name was nowhere to be found, as if I had never existed or had been permanently removed from the family roster. Rosa noticed my reaction to the mailbox and squeezed my hand as we walked toward the front door. "Remember, Misha," she whispered, "how people treat you says more about them than it says about you." When my mother answered the door, her greeting was warm but felt performative, like she was playing the role of a caring parent for an audience rather than genuinely expressing joy at seeing her daughter after months of separation. She hugged me tightly and commented on how much I had grown, but her attention quickly shifted to Rosa and the business that had brought us to San Antonio. "We're so grateful that you could drive down," Mom said to Rosa, barely glancing at me. "We have so much to discuss about Emma's future." The way she phrased it, as if my future was something to be decided by the adults without significant input from me, immediately set me on edge. But what truly shocked me was what I saw when we entered the house itself. My bedroom, which had remained essentially unchanged during my first year in Fredericksburg, had been completely transformed into what appeared to be a home office and crafting space. My bed, dresser, and personal belongings had been removed and replaced with a desk, filing cabinets, and shelving units filled with scrapbooking supplies and other hobby materials.
The walls, which had once displayed my artwork and academic achievements, now held my mother's certificates from various workshops and classes she had taken. When I asked about my belongings, Mom explained that they had packed everything carefully and stored it in the garage, but the casual tone of her explanation suggested that she didn't expect me to ever need access to these items again. She had claimed my room for her own purposes with the assumption that I wouldn't be returning to reclaim it. Isabella's reaction to my visit was equally revealing. When she came downstairs to greet us, she seemed genuinely surprised to see me, as if my parents hadn't told her I was coming. Her surprise quickly turned to what looked like discomfort, as if my presence was disrupting a routine that no longer included space for me. "How long are you staying?" she asked, not with excitement about spending time together but with what sounded like concern about how my visit might interfere with her planned activities. During our family meeting in the living room, I learned the full extent of how my parents had restructured their lives around Isabella's needs and ambitions. Dad had reduced his involvement in the auto dealerships to spend more time supporting Isabella's academic and extracurricular commitments. Mom had essentially made Isabella's success her full-time job, coordinating schedules, arranging private coaching, and networking with other parents to create opportunities. They described Isabella's achievements with the kind of detailed pride that I remembered them once showing for all three of their children. She had been selected for the state honor choir, had scored in the top percentile on her PSAT exams, and had been elected to student government positions that would look impressive on college applications. Every aspect of her development was being carefully managed and optimized for maximum future advantage. But what shocked me most was how they talked about these investments in Isabella's future. They weren't just proud parents celebrating their daughter's accomplishments, they were strategic planners discussing their return on investment. They had calculated the costs of Isabella's private coaching and projected the scholarship opportunities that might result. They had researched the networking benefits of the social organizations they had joined to support Isabella's activities. "We've learned so much about what it takes to really maximize a child's potential," Dad explained, as if I wasn't sitting right there listening to him describe optimization strategies that had never been applied to my development. "It requires complete focus and commitment from the entire family." The implication was clear: they couldn't maximize Isabella's potential while also supporting my needs and development. In their minds, successful parenting required choosing one child to receive their full investment while finding alternative arrangements for any other children who might interfere with that focus. The most shocking revelation came when Mom showed Rosa a photo album that documented Isabella's achievements over the past 2 years. Page after page displayed pictures of Isabella at various competitions, award ceremonies, and special events, always accompanied by both parents who looked radiantly proud of their daughter's success. The album told the story of a devoted family unit working together to achieve impressive goals. But as I flipped through the pages, I realized that this family unit only included 3 people. There were no empty spaces where my photo might have been, no captions mentioning a sister who was temporarily living elsewhere, no acknowledgement that the Rodriguez family had ever included anyone other than Michael, Sandra, and Isabella. They had created a complete family narrative that didn't include me, and this narrative had apparently become so convincing that they seemed to believe it themselves. When Rosa asked about how they explained my absence to friends and extended family, Mom's answer revealed the depth of their revision of our family history. "We tell people that Emma is thriving in a specialized program that's better suited to her particular needs," Mom said, her voice smooth and practiced. "Most people understand that different children require different approaches, and they're happy to hear that Emma has found an environment where she can really flourish." This explanation was technically true, but fundamentally dishonest. They weren't telling people that they had chosen to focus their resources on one daughter while sending the other to live with her grandmother. Instead, they were presenting my absence as evidence of their thoughtful parenting and my specialized placement as a form of educational advantage. The shocking revelation wasn't just that my parents had moved on without me, it was that they had reconstructed our family history in ways that made my absence seem like a positive choice rather than an abandonment. They had convinced themselves and others that sending me away had been an act of sophisticated parenting rather than an admission that they couldn't manage the needs of multiple children simultaneously. When Rosa asked direct questions about their expectations for my future relationship with the family, their answers revealed how completely they had separated me from their ongoing family identity. They envisioned occasional visits and holiday gatherings, but these would be structured like visits from an extended family member rather than the homecomings of a daughter who had been temporarily living elsewhere. "We want Emma to always know she's loved and valued," Dad said, "but we also want her to build her own independent life in Fredericksburg without feeling obligated to maintain the same level of connection to San Antonio." The shocking revelation forced me to understand that my parents weren't just asking Rosa to become my legal guardian as a temporary convenience or practical necessity. They were asking her to permanently replace them as my primary family so that they could focus completely on the child they had decided was more worthy of their investment. The 2-year period I had experienced as a healing separation had actually been a trial period during which my parents determined that family life was simpler and more successful without me. The legal guardianship wasn't a recognition of how well I had adapted to life with Rosa, it was their way of making permanent an arrangement that had allowed them to optimize their resources around Isabella's development. As we drove back to Fredericksburg that evening, Rosa and I barely spoke, both of us processing the magnitude of what we had discovered. But the shocking revelation, as painful as it was, also clarified my situation in ways that would ultimately prove liberating. I no longer had to wonder whether my parents missed me or worry about whether I was disappointing them by thriving in Fredericksburg. I could stop hoping for a reunion that they had no intention of pursuing and start building a future based on relationships that valued me for who I was rather than tolerating me as an obligation. The direct confrontation, the confrontation I had been avoiding for 2 years, finally erupted 3 weeks after our visit to San Antonio, during a phone call that started as routine check-in but quickly became the most honest conversation my parents and I had ever had. Rosa had insisted that I needed to respond directly to the guardianship papers rather than allowing the adults to make decisions about my future without
Hearing my own voice and perspective. "You're 14 years old, Maya," she had told me the night before I placed the call. "You're old enough to speak your truth, even when that truth is difficult for other people to hear." I had spent days rehearsing what I wanted to say, writing and rewriting my thoughts until I could express them clearly and calmly. Rosa had helped me understand that confrontation didn't have to mean anger or drama. It could simply mean refusing to accept explanations that didn't match reality and insisting on honest acknowledgement of what was actually happening. When Mom answered the phone, her voice carried the same artificially cheerful tone she had used during our recent visit, as if we were simply going to chat about school and weather rather than address the fundamental restructuring of our family relationships. She asked about my classes, commented on how nice it had been to see me, and began updating me on Isabella's latest achievements before I interrupted her. "Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad about the guardianship papers," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected it to be. There was a brief pause, and then she called for Dad to pick up the extension. When both parents were on the line, I took a deep breath and began saying the words I had been practicing. "I know you want Abuela Rosa to become my legal guardian so that you can focus completely on Isabella," I said. "I understand that you think this arrangement is better for everyone, but I need you to be honest about what's really happening." Dad's response was immediate and defensive. "Emma, this isn't about choosing between you and Isabella. This is about recognizing that you've found a better situation in Fredericksburg than we could provide in San Antonio." "That's not true, Dad," I replied, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "You could provide the same situation in San Antonio that you're providing for Isabella. You're choosing not to." The silence that followed was longer and more uncomfortable than any pause in our previous conversations. When Mom finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its artificial brightness and carried a note of something that might have been guilt or irritation. "Emma, you're being unfair," she said. "We've made sacrifices to ensure that you have a stable, loving environment with Rosa. We're still supporting you financially and emotionally." This was the moment when I decided to push past the careful politeness that had characterized all our interactions since Diego's death and say what I had been thinking for months. "You converted my bedroom into your craft room," I said. "You took my name off the mailbox. You have photo albums that show your family as Mom, Dad, and Isabella. You're not supporting me emotionally, you're paying Rosa to replace you as my family so that you don't have to deal with me anymore." The confrontation escalated quickly from there, with both parents responding to my directness with a level of honesty that they had previously avoided. Dad's voice became sharp and frustrated as he defended their decisions. "Do you have any idea how difficult it's been to manage Isabella's schedule while worrying about you?" he demanded. "Do you know how much easier it's been for all of us since you've been in Fredericksburg? Isabella's grades have improved, our marriage is stronger, and you're clearly thriving with Rosa. Why would we want to disrupt something that's working for everyone?" His words confirmed what I had suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. My absence had made their lives easier and happier. They weren't missing me or struggling with our separation, they were relieved by it. Mom tried to soften Dad's bluntness, but her attempt at damage control only made things worse. "What your father means is that we've all found our places in this new arrangement," she said. "You belong with Rosa in ways that we couldn't have predicted. It's not that we don't want you, it's that we want what's best for you. If you wanted what was best for me, you would have gotten me counseling after Diego died instead of sending me away," I replied. "If you wanted what was best for me, you would have tried to help our family heal together instead of deciding that I was the problem that needed to be solved." This observation seemed to hit particularly hard because Mom's response was more emotional than anything I had heard from her since Diego's death. "You were the problem, Emma," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You wouldn't stop grieving. You wouldn't participate in family activities. You made every day about sadness and loss when the rest of us were trying to move forward. Isabella needed parents who could focus on life instead of death, and we couldn't do that while you were constantly reminding us of what we had lost." The brutal honesty of her words was shocking, but also clarifying. For the first time, Mom was acknowledging that they had sent me away not because Fredericksburg was better for me, but because my presence in San Antonio had been better for them and Isabella. Dad seemed to realize that Mom had said too much because he tried to walk back her admission. "What your mother means is that we all needed different things to heal properly," he said. "Rosa was able to give you individual attention that we couldn't provide while also supporting Isabella. But I wasn't willing to let them retreat back into comfortable euphemisms and partial truths." "No, Dad, that's not what Mom means," I said. "Mom means that you chose Isabella over me because her grief was easier to manage than mine. You decided that I was too damaged to keep, so you found someone else to take care of me." The confrontation continued for another 20 minutes, with both parents alternating between defensiveness and attempts to reframe their decisions as acts of love rather than abandonment. They insisted that they had made the best choice possible under difficult circumstances, that they had always intended for me to maintain connections to the family, and that my anger was unfair given how well the arrangement had worked out. But their arguments kept circling back to the same basic truth: they had found family life easier and more successful without me, and they wanted to make that arrangement permanent. No matter how they tried to dress it up with language about specialized needs or optimal environments, the core reality was that they had decided I was expendable in ways that Isabella was not. The confrontation ended when I said the words that I had been building toward throughout the entire conversation. "I'll tell Rosa that she can sign the guardianship papers," I said, "but I want you to understand what you're really doing. You're not finding me a better home, you're firing me as your daughter so that you can focus on the child you think is more likely to make you proud." Mom tried to interrupt, but I continued talking over her protests. "I'm going to sign those papers because Rosa loves me in ways that you apparently can't, and because I'd rather have one grandmother who wants me than two parents who see me as a burden. But don't pretend that this decision is about what's best for me, it's about what's easiest for you." When I hung up the phone, Rosa was waiting in the kitchen with hot chocolate and the kind of wordless comfort that had become her specialty. She didn't ask for details about the conversation or offer opinions about what I should do next. She simply sat with me while I cried, her presence a reminder that love doesn't have to be conditional or complicated. The direct confrontation had been painful, but it had also been necessary. For 2 years I had been accepting my parents' explanations for our family's restructuring without challenging the contradictions and half-truths that made their story more palatable. The confrontation forced all of us to acknowledge what was really happening, and that acknowledgement, however brutal, was the foundation for everything that would come next. The descent the weeks following my confrontation with my parents marked the beginning of the most difficult period of my adolescence, a time when the full weight of their rejection settled into my daily life like a constant ache that colored everything I tried to do. Rosa had agreed to sign the guardianship papers after consulting with me, but the legal formalities did nothing to ease the emotional devastation of being officially severed from the family I had spent 14 years believing would always be mine. The immediate aftermath of our phone conversation brought a silence that was more painful than the confrontation itself. My parents didn't call to check on me or to attempt any kind of repair of our relationship. There were no follow-up conversations, no letters attempting to explain their perspective more gently, and no gestures suggesting they regretted the harshness of our exchange. The silence seemed to confirm that they were relieved to have the difficult conversation behind them and were eager to move forward with their Isabella-focused family life without the complications that maintaining a relationship with me would require. School became my refuge during this period, but even there I struggled with concentration and motivation that had previously come naturally to me. My grades began slipping not because I couldn't understand the material, but because I found it nearly impossible to care about assignments and tests when my entire sense of identity and belonging had been shattered. The journalism projects that had once excited me now felt pointless, and I withdrew from extracurricular activities that had helped me build friendships and confidence. My appetite disappeared almost completely, and Rosa had to coax me to eat even small portions of the meals she prepared with extra care and attention. Sleep became elusive, with nights spent staring at the ceiling and replaying conversations with my parents, searching for signs I might have missed or words I might have said differently. The physical symptoms of emotional distress manifested as headaches, stomach aches, and a persistent fatigue that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. Rosa watched this decline with the kind of quiet concern that comes from understanding grief in its many forms. She had seen enough children struggle through family disruptions during her years as an elementary school teacher to recognize the signs of someone whose fundamental sense of security had been destroyed. But she also understood that healing from this kind of betrayal couldn't be rushed or forced, and that my immediate job was simply to survive each day until the acute pain began to lessen. The social dynamics at school became complicated as word spread through the small Fredericksburg community that I was now living with my grandmother permanently. Rather than temporarily, well-meaning teachers and classmates asked questions about the change that I couldn't answer honestly without revealing the full extent of my family's rejection. I developed stock responses about my parents' work schedules and my grandmother's need for companionship, explanations that were technically plausible but felt like lies every time I spoke them. The hardest part of this period was the way it forced me to question everything I had believed about love, family, and my own worth as a person. If my own parents could decide I was too difficult to keep, what did that say about my fundamental value as a human being? If the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had found that love to be conditional after all, how could I trust that anyone else would ever genuinely care about me? These questions led to a spiral of self-doubt and self-blame that Rosa recognized as dangerous. She began finding reasons to keep me close during the worst days, assigning me tasks that required my presence in the house and garden, creating opportunities for conversation that didn't demand emotional revelations but simply maintained human connection during a time when I was tempted to isolate myself completely.
The financial reality of my new situation also contributed to the sense of dissent during this period. While Rosa was receiving some support from my parents, the amount was significantly less than what a middle-class family would typically spend on a teenager's needs and activities. There were no funds for the kinds of extracurricular activities, social events, and material possessions that had been routine parts of my life in San Antonio. This economic adjustment might have been easier if it had been framed as a temporary sacrifice or a character-building experience, but knowing that it was permanent and that my parents were simultaneously investing heavily in Isabella's opportunities made every limitation feel like another reminder of my diminished status in their priorities. When I needed new clothes, Rosa and I shopped at thrift stores and discount retailers. When my classmates discussed summer camps and family vacations, I learned to change the subject or find excuses to leave conversations that highlighted the differences in our family resources. The dissent was also marked by a growing awareness of how much my parents' rejection was affecting Rosa herself. She had taken on the legal and financial responsibility for raising a teenager during what should have been her peaceful retirement years. She was using her fixed income to support needs that my parents could have easily afforded, and she was providing emotional support for trauma that they had created but weren't helping to heal. Watching Rosa sacrifice her own comfort and convenience to provide stability for me during this period made me feel guilty about the burden I had become, which only deepened my depression and self-doubt. The people who should have been taking care of me had passed that responsibility to someone else, and now that someone else was paying the price for their decision. The lowest point of the dissent came about 6 weeks after the guardianship papers were signed, when I received a graduation announcement in the mail from one of Isabella's private school events. The announcement was addressed only to me, not to Emma and Rosa or the Martinez family, suggesting that my parents weren't even acknowledging Rosa as a legitimate part of my family structure. The card itself was elegant and expensive, featuring a professional photograph of Isabella in her cap and gown, surrounded by both parents who looked radiantly proud. On the back of the announcement, Mom had written a brief note: "We thought you would want to know about Isabella's achievement. We're so proud of her academic success and excited about her bright future. Hope you're doing well in Fredericksburg. Love, Mom and Dad." The casual tone of the note, combined with its focus on Isabella's success and generic wishes for my well-being, crystallized everything that was wrong with my family situation. My parents were sharing Isabella's achievements with me as if I were a distant relative or family friend, whose connection to the family was pleasant but peripheral. There was no acknowledgement that I should have been at Isabella's graduation as her sister, no recognition that being excluded from this milestone was painful, and no attempt to maintain the kind of close sibling relationship that we had once shared. The graduation announcement became the symbol of everything I had lost, and I spent that entire day crying with an intensity that scared both Rosa and me. It was the first time since Diego's death that I had cried with the kind of raw desperation that comes from grief that feels too large for one person to contain. Rosa found me that evening sitting in the garden behind her house, still holding Isabella's graduation announcement and staring at the photograph of a family that no longer included me. She sat down beside me without speaking and simply waited until I was ready to put my pain into words. "I don't know how to stop missing them," I finally said. "I know they don't want me, but I can't stop wanting them to want me." "That's because you have a good heart, Misha," Rosa replied. "People with good hearts don't stop loving just because they're not loved back in the same way." The dissent had taught me that some kinds of loss don't get better quickly, and that healing from family betrayal requires learning to live with a permanent change in your understanding of yourself and your place in the world. But it had also shown me that survival was possible, and that the love I had lost from my parents could be replaced, slowly and carefully, with different kinds of love that were potentially more reliable and less conditional. The dissent was ending not because my pain had disappeared, but because I was beginning to understand that my worth as a person wasn't determined by my parents' inability to love me consistently. Rosa's steady presence during the worst weeks had demonstrated that there were adults who could love a difficult teenager without finding that difficulty to be disqualifying, and her commitment to my well-being had begun to restore my faith in the possibility of genuine unconditional care. The legal guardianship papers had made me officially Rosa's responsibility, but during the descent, I learned that she had chosen to become my family in ways that went far beyond legal obligations. That choice, made freely and maintained consistently even during my most challenging moments, was the foundation that would eventually allow me to build a new understanding of what family could mean and who I could become when I was valued for my authentic self rather than tolerated as a burden. The turning point in my recovery began with something as simple as Rosa teaching me to bake her grandmother's recipe for tres leches cake, a tradition that had been passed down through 4 generations of women in our family. It was 3 months after the guardianship papers had been signed, and I was still struggling with the crushing weight of my parents' rejection when Rosa announced that we were going to spend the weekend learning to make desserts for the church's annual fundraising dinner. Your Isabella used to say that hands that are busy with creating something beautiful don't have time to tear apart something good, Rosa explained as she laid out ingredients on the kitchen counter. We're going to put your hands to work and see if her wisdom still holds true. At first, the project felt like another attempt to distract me from my sadness, similar to the garden work and household tasks that Rosa had been using to keep me engaged with daily life. But as she began teaching me the precise techniques for separating eggs, whipping cream to the perfect consistency, and timing the soaking of the cake layers, I discovered that baking required a level of focus and attention that left no mental space for the painful thoughts that had been circling through my mind for months. The tres leches cake recipe was more than just a cooking lesson, it was a masterclass in patience, precision, and the kind of methodical problem-solving that would later prove invaluable in my technology career. Each step had to be completed in the correct order, and with careful attention to timing and temperature. Mistakes couldn't be ignored or covered up, they had to be recognized immediately and corrected before they compromised the entire project. Baking is like life, Misha, Rosa said as she watched me carefully fold ingredients together to avoid deflating the delicate mixture. You have to follow the steps in order, you have to be patient with the process, and you have to trust that the final result will be worth the effort even when you can't see it yet. As we worked together in the kitchen that weekend, Rosa began sharing stories about the women in our family who had used the same recipe during their own difficult times. My great-great-grandmother had baked tres leches cakes to sell during the Depression, using the income to keep her family fed when her husband lost his job. My great-grandmother had made the cake for church gatherings as a way of maintaining community connections during her husband's long illness. This recipe has seen our family through some very dark times, Rosa explained. It's not magic, but it's something that connects you to the strength of the women who came before you. When you make this cake, you're carrying on their legacy of finding ways to create sweetness, even when life is bitter. The church fundraising dinner became my first real social success since moving to Fredericksburg permanently. The tres leches cake was a hit with the congregation, and several people asked for the recipe or complimented my technique. For the first time in months, I felt proud of something I had accomplished, and I began to understand that there were forms of validation and connection that didn't depend on my parents' approval or recognition. Mrs. Gonzalez, the church secretary who coordinated community events, approached me after the dinner with a proposition that would become the first step in my journey back to confidence and purpose. Emma, we've been looking for someone to help with our computer systems and website, she said. The church received a grant to update our technology, but none of us older folks know much about computers. Would you be interested in learning how to manage our online presence? The offer was unexpected and exciting in ways I hadn't anticipated. During my time in San Antonio, I had enjoyed my computer classes, but had never considered technology as anything more than a tool for research and communication. The prospect of learning to build and maintain actual systems felt like a real responsibility that could make a meaningful difference in the community. Rosa encouraged me to accept the position, recognizing that the church technology project could provide exactly the kind of engaging challenge I needed to rebuild my sense of competence and purpose. Sometimes the lifeline you need comes disguised as an opportunity to help someone else, she observed. The church technology project introduced me to Pastor Martinez, a young priest who had recently graduated from seminary and brought with him a vision for using digital tools to strengthen community connections and expand the church's outreach efforts. Pastor Martinez became my first adult mentor outside of Rosa, and his approach to teaching and guidance was perfectly suited to my personality and learning style. Unlike my parents, who had always focused on final results and external achievements, Pastor Martinez was interested in the process of learning and the development of problem-solving skills. When I encountered technical challenges or made mistakes while setting up the church's new computer systems, he treated these obstacles as learning opportunities rather than failures that needed to be quickly corrected or hidden. "The goal isn't to be perfect, Emma," he told me during one of our weekly training sessions. "The goal is to be persistent and curious. If you can learn to troubleshoot problems without getting frustrated or giving up, you'll be able to handle any technical challenge that comes your way." Pastor Martinez also introduced me to the concept of service as a path to healing, explaining that many people find their way through personal difficulties by focusing on ways they can contribute to the well-being of others. When you're helping solve problems for other people, you often discover solutions to your own problems, he said. The church technology work expanded quickly from basic website maintenance to more complex projects like setting up online donation systems, creating digital newsletters, and managing social media accounts that helped community members stay connected with church activities and each other. Each successful project built my confidence and demonstrated that I had valuable skills that were appreciated and needed. The technical work also connected me with other young people in the community who were interested in computers and digital communication. Through the church's youth program, I met teenagers from surrounding towns who shared my curiosity about technology and my interest in using these tools for positive community impact. Maria Santos became my closest friend during this period, a 15-year-old from a neighboring town whose family had moved to Texas from Mexico when she was young. Maria was fluent in both Spanish and English, like me, and she had been helping her father's small construction business with their bookkeeping and customer communications using basic computer skills she had taught herself. "We should start a business together," Maria suggested one afternoon as we worked on updating the church's membership database. "There are so many small businesses around here that need help with computers, but they can't afford to hire big companies from San Antonio." The idea of starting a business had never occurred to me, but Maria's enthusiasm was infectious, and Rosa encouraged us to explore the possibility. "At your age, you have nothing to lose by trying," she said. "If it doesn't work, you'll learn something valuable. If it does work, you'll have created something meaningful." Maria and I spent the summer developing our business plan for a service that would help local small businesses with basic computers like setting up email systems, creating simple websites, and managing customer databases. We called our company Valley Tech Solutions, and we marketed our services through church bulletins, community center announcements, and word-of-mouth referrals from satisfied customers. Our first client was Maria's father, who needed help organizing his customer information and creating professional-looking estimates for construction projects. The work was straightforward but time-consuming, and when we presented him with an organized digital system that made his business operations more efficient, he was so impressed that he recommended us to other contractors in the area. Within 3 months, Valley Tech Solutions had a dozen regular clients and was generating enough income for both Maria and me to start saving money for college and other future goals. More importantly, the business gave me a sense of purpose and competence that was entirely independent of my family situation. I was succeeding based on my own efforts and abilities, not because of any advantages or support that my parents had provided. The success of Valley Tech Solutions also attracted the attention of my high school's business teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, who invited me to join the school's entrepreneur club and to compete in regional business plan competitions. These activities connected me with other students who were interested in starting their own companies and introduced me to adult mentors from the local business community who offered guidance and encouragement. You have a natural instinct for identifying problems and developing practical solutions, Mr. Rodriguez told me after reviewing our business plan. That's the most important skill any entrepreneur can have, and it's something that can't really be taught. You either see opportunities or you don't, and you definitely see them. The lifeline that began with learning to bake tres leches cake had evolved into a network of supportive relationships, meaningful work, and growing confidence in my ability to create positive outcomes through my own efforts. For the first time since Diego's death, I began to envision a future that was exciting and full of possibilities rather than limited by other people's decisions about my worth or potential. Rosa watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction, never taking credit for my successes, but always providing the steady support and encouragement that made them possible. You're discovering who you are when you're not trying to be who someone else wants you to be, she observed. That's the most important discovery any person can make. The lifeline had pulled me out of the deepest part of my grief and given me something to build on, but it had also taught me that recovery isn't just about returning to who you were before trauma occurred. Sometimes recovery means becoming someone entirely new, someone who is stronger and more authentic than the person you were before life tested your resilience and forced you to discover resources you didn't know you possessed.